This is a call to order the May 5th, 2021 regular meeting of the Ducktown Council. And in that we're now operating with the full council here, I'd like to ask Council Member Nancy Kavinish that she'd lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Before we proceed, I'd like to make an agenda change. I'd like to add a closed session to the end of tonight's agenda. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to add a closed session.
I move that we add the closed session to the end of the agenda this evening.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mayor votes aye. Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau?
Aye.
Councilmember Mooney?
Aye.
Councilmember Whitman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanis?
Aye.
The motion passed 5-0. We have now added a closed session. I'd also like to start with a roll call. This is Mayor Don Kingston.
Mayor Pro Tem Monica Thibodeau.
Councilman Mooney.
Councilman Whitman.
Councilmember Cavanis.
Town Manager Drew Havens.
Town Attorney Robert Hobbs.
We also have with us tonight Fire Chief Donna Black, Police Chief Jeff Ackerman, Director of Community Development Joe Hurd, Town Clerk Lori Ackerman, Deputy Town Clerk Kay Nickens, and our PIO Christian Legner. With that, we'll go on to item number 2, public comments. If anyone would like to address the council this evening, please step forward to the podium and state your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
This is a public comment that came in from Patty Bossert. My name is Patty Bossert, and I'm a full-time resident of Duck. My concern continues to be the lack of a Dare County EMS ambulance permanently stationed at the Duck Public Safety Building. Residents and visitors to the town of Duck deserve to know that Duck is providing the highest level of advanced life-saving services by ensuring our town addresses the shortfalls of not having a permanently assigned Dare County ambulance at our public safety building. In the interest of public safety for myself and my fellow residents, as well as visitors, I would like to know when this year's deployment strategy of a Dare County ambulance into the town of Duck will take effect. Will it be Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day weekend? Sincerely, Patty Bossert.
Thank you, Lori, for reading that. Christian, are there any other comments? There being none, we'll close public comments. Go on to item number 3, the consent agenda. This evening on the consent agenda, we have the minutes from the April 7th, 2021 regular meeting and Resolution 21-04, a resolution of the Town Council of the Town of Duck, North Carolina, establishing financial and budgetary policies. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve is presented.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor?
No, other than I'm very excited to have these budgetary policies and financial budgetary policies. So thank you, Drew, for pulling these together. I think they're going to really help this council and future councils.
There being no other comments, we'll do a roll call vote. Mayor votes aye. Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau?
Aye.
Councilmember Mooney?
Aye.
Councilmember Whitman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanis?
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0. The consent agenda is approved.
And I assume that the date of the adoption will be changed on the Resolution 21-04.
So 2105?
Okay. So just a typo. Well, that'll be fixed when it's signed.
Okay.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to go to item number 4, festival presentation. At this time, I'd like to ask Fire Chief Donna Black and Master Firefighter Ben Boyd to go to the podium. Many years ago, the Town Council established a recognition program to recognize employees for service to the town in 5-year intervals. And with that, they receive a certificate and a gift certificate from a Duck business. And tonight, we're pleased to recognize Master Firefighter Brandon Boyd for his employment with the town of Duck for 5 years.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, community. Tonight I have the opportunity to recognize Brandon Boyd, who's behind me, so we can maintain some spacing here. Brandon came to us as a part-timer, and then 5 years ago we were able to bring him on full-time. And I call him our silent killer in a positive way. He's not the most loud, he's not the most verbal, but he's an impressive young man, will do anything, has been very helpful, especially over the last year, covering extra shifts, even around taking some FMLA time to have his third baby. So tonight, I'm really honored to let you all see Brandon Boyd tonight. He's done a great job for us. I'm glad he's with us, and I want to congratulate him. We will do this appropriately, so we'll have you hold that.
Congratulations, Brandon. Thank you for your service to the town. And item number 5, old business items deferred from previous meetings. There is none at this time. Going on to item number 6, new business. Discussion and consideration of authorizing a public hearing on Ordinance 21-01, amending Chapter 156 zoning ordinance of the town of Duck, North Carolina for consistency with the NCGS Chapter 160D. With this, I'd like to turn over to Joe Hurd, Director of Community Development. Joe?
Right. Well, thank you, Mayor Kingston. Good evening, members of council, members of the public in attendance, both here personally and those virtually with us. For this, try to actually help expedite our agenda a little bit here. You have 2 items. There are 2 ordinances, number 2101 and 2102. That are very much related in terms of why we're making these proposals for you. They were reviewed at the same time. Since they are separate and distinct parts of our town code, we have set them up as separate voting items for you, but there's no reason why we can't cover all of those changes in one presentation, and that's what I'd like to do for you this evening. And then you can decide whether this is something you wish to set a public hearing on for your next meeting. We've talked about this topic on numerous occasions over the last year, maybe even further back than that. But what we had was some newly adopted legislation that actually occurred all the way back in 2019. But due to deadlines being shifted for COVID reasons and things like that, we're now bumping up against the final deadline of July 1st, 2021 to make these changes. So what happened here is that the legislature adopted a fairly comprehensive set of changes to the enabling legislation for planning, zoning, development standards that communities are allowed to adopt and enforce. So that's the kind of the bottom line thing here. It is a mandatory update. So there's not a community, a city or county in the state that is not having to go through what we're going through this evening. So the intent of this, when it was originally thought up, which is now probably closer to a decade ago than a few years ago, was to consolidate all the county and municipal regulations, to clarify different types of development review, use common terminology for different things that were adopted over 50, 60 years of legislation over time. You know, things were adopted using different terms and it was unclear sometimes what it meant. So this process to standardize all of this and develop that common language was done through our North Carolina Bar Association. They took on this project to help clarify this, worked with a variety of stakeholders to do it, including everybody from planners to Home Builders Association, to just a variety of different stakeholders in that process. So, but the intent of this was not to change standards. It was just to kind of consolidate, make this all more consistent. So the things I wanted to highlight for you this evening are just really some of the main points of what these changes look at. So you'll have a little better understanding of what this is all about. So in reviewing this, it's set up every decision that this council or your appointed boards and committees make into one of these categories. So we have administrative decisions. These are things that my staff and I would be involved in. So these are things where you as a council have set a standard, but you don't want to review every one of the, we talk about how many hundreds of permits we, review every year. You don't want to have to, to review all of those things at meetings. So you set standards for some basic development, residential development, and as long as an owner is complying with those things, you allow us to issue those things administratively. So that's what those are. Legislative, these are decisions in the development side of things. We're talking about rezonings and text amendments, basically, are what you're looking at that would be considered legislative decisions. So you're creating the standards, they're just kind of general policies or standards that you're creating for the town. But they do have some aspects of which with a rezoning could be specific to a particular property, but basically you're just setting, again, a set of standards for the town. Quasi-judicial decisions are the ones that become a little bit more challenging. In the past, we have referred to those types of decisions that you make have fallen into categories including conditional use permits and special exceptions. Those are the ones that you see. The Board of Adjustment also sees variances and appeals of decisions. They will continue to do that. There's no change proposed to who's reviewing what, but we do want you to be aware that one of the changes is that they are getting rid of conditional use permits and special exceptions, and they will all now fall under the blanket of a special use permit. So we'll be using that term after we adopt this. So again, just, this kind of outlines it a little further as far as the process that's involved in this, but you're familiar with this already as far as the planning board on legislative things, reviewing and making recommendations. Presently, the board also does that same level of review on special use permits as well. So after the update, this right here kind of outlines how this is going to work. The one other thing I did not mention had to do with subdivisions, and this covers that. So staff would be responsible for those administrative permits, issuing certificates of occupancy after something has been properly inspected, reviewing site plans that are not associated with a special use permit. Okay, so just a general, even a commercial site plan, if all the uses are permitted uses, that doesn't have to come before you and the planning board. It also includes subdivision review. What I can say on that one, that is a change to the process from what we do now. But for Duck, it's a largely, or we'll just say minimally relevant change because we have virtually nothing left that is going to be subdivided, that's of any significance as far as large vacant properties or things like that. So that one won't have much impact for us. Planning board will still review text amendments and rezonings. They will still maintain their role in reviewing special use permits. We'll talk about that a little bit more detail later. Council will still review the same things that you have in the past as well. Board of Adjustment will still retain their review of the administrative appeals and variances. So just a couple of the highlights. Again, a lot of this just revolves around changing the text of our ordinance to match up with the law in the state, so it's clearer that we are compliant with those state standards. So references are going to be updated to Chapter 160D, the new enabling law. Changes, we have different references to what we call the land use plan. That'll now be comprehensive and land use plan, consistent with the document we've adopted now. There's, again, just some other wording that deals with the planning development regulation jurisdiction. That's basically our town boundaries in our case. We do not have an extraterritorial area where we extend to other properties outside of the town. We have another minimally relevant section there with some wording related to bona fide farm exemptions. We're required to have it. Unlikely we'll ever be required to use it, but.
Unless it's a fish farm, right?
So there, and then we have just some other updates related to referring to all of our zoning districts as conventional zoning, as opposed to, in Duck, we do not have any conditional districts set up. So they're all going to be referred to as conventional districts. We already talked about the change to the referring to things as special use permits. And again, with all of these, we're not changing the standards or the rules. We're just changing some of the wording for consistency with the statute. We've updated, with that change to the special use permits, we've updated that table of permitted uses. Some other things, again, just for consistency with the ordinance, referring to the person making decisions as the zoning administrator. Just for clarification, the planning board did ask about that one. That could be me, that could be Sandy Cross in some cases. Could be, you know, if we're fortunate enough to get the other planner position, it could be that individual at some point. So with all that in mind, so it's a term that's used, but it could apply to whoever's making a decision on a permit, or could be a notice of violation or something of that nature. Just some other updates on, there were updates relating to conflicts of interest. So those provisions in our ordinance have been updated for consistency with the statute. The findings we have to make for variances, not significant changes, but there were some changes. Again, we're updating that to be consistent. Hearing notification procedures, we already had most of that. Again, we tweaked it to be consistent. We already go above and beyond the basic legal requirements for those types of things when we advertise public hearings. And one thing you will begin to see that'll be a little different. They did have some clarification regarding consistency statements with the comprehensive plan. So you will begin to see, once this is adopted, something a little more formal that is going to require you to make a consistency statement as part of your decisions for certain types of decisions that you'll make. Within the subdivisions, I think I already highlighted the main thing there, that things that would have had to go to council for subdivision are now an administrative review process. I will share with you the thought behind that is simply that you have a set of standards that you've adopted for subdivisions. You know, lots can have to be this wide, have to have frontage, they have to be this big, they have to have these certain criteria that they meet. A developer has to install certain improvements. All of those things are spelled out in the ordinance, and the reason why this has shifted to more of an administrative review statewide is that there's really not a role for a decision-making body. In other words, you have these adopted, your role is setting those standards, and you can still do that. That doesn't change that. But once those standards are adopted, you can't go in, if someone comes to you with a subdivision proposal, you can't go ahead and ask them for other things that are outside of that order. And if they comply with those standards that you've set, you have to approve it. You can't deny it if they, so from that standpoint, thinking about it that way, it makes more sense that be an administrative process, because all we're doing is applying the standards that you've already set. Again, in our case, that's not going to be a big issue because we just don't have a lot, if any, areas that are going to be subdivided in the future. So for us, it's largely irrelevant, but just to explain a little bit of that for you. And I don't think there's anything else in there regarding subdivisions that I needed to highlight either. So that's it in a nutshell, just trying to at least give you a general idea of the types of changes that were made in the ordinance. Understand you'd received copies today of the full documents where the changes are highlighted in those documents. So, over the course of the next month, next few weeks, please, as you wish, you're welcome to to go through those, and if you have any particular questions or things like that, just let us know, and we'll be prepared to answer that when we come up for the public hearing, hopefully in June. But again, this involves changes to the zoning ordinance, and those are under Ordinance 21-01, and the subdivision ordinance, which would be under 21-02. And so tonight, we're simply asking for your consideration of setting a public hearing for the June council meeting to hear those ordinances.
Joe, just one question on subdivisions. If there was a strip of land, I know we don't have that in Duck, but if there was a strip of land that somebody wanted to develop as a subdivision, would the council only be involved if, in fact, it was, say, zoned commercial and they want to make it residential, as an example?
The council would certainly be involved if that was the case, if somebody wanted to, because that would be a rezoning, so that is a legislative decision that you would be involved in. But the general subdivision itself would not be, so that would be a separate process technically.
How was it handled before? I mean,
How was it set up before? They had, the planning board is actually the most significant one. They would review, but even the council would review a preliminary plat. So where they're proposing their layout and all that, you approve the design of that subdivision, and then the developer goes back and installs those improvements per the ordinance, and then comes back with a final plat. And once that's approved, they can begin to sell lots. So, again, what we have now is very limited. Almost any subdivision, and I've looked over this, at the town before saying this, but almost any subdivision that we would see right now would already be considered an exempt subdivision, because you'd be talking about maybe the possibility of cutting one larger lot into two or something like that. That's something that's already exempt under state law, so you won't see that anyway. So, unless at some point in time, the core property, goes up for sale and, something of that nature, I really don't think this will come into play much for us, since pretty much all the major properties in town have already been developed. The only other areas where it would even have any potential would be if any of the common areas that neighborhoods own, if a neighborhood wanted to consider doing, if they were legally allowed to and wanted to consider that, I guess there might be an instance or two where that could occur.
Joe, I have a question about covenants. So does this chapter impact all the, I guess I've never really fully understood the covenants that exist in the subdivision and how they play into the subdivision piece. So that's one question. And then the other question I have is, does this impact at all the village commercial development option? Do we have to change language or specifics around that thing that we do here?
Okay. I'll answer the second one first, and then also let Mr. Hobbs chime in on the first question as well, just in
Yeah.
case I'm not complete in my answer there. But we'll start with the village commercial development option. So the thing that changes on that is just simply a wording change.
Okay.
Right now, that is set up as a special exception. It would now be a special use permit.
Okay.
This proposal does not change any of the standards, does not change any of the findings or things that need to be made. So the impact, as far as the council is concerned, there really wouldn't be any
Okay.
impact as far as that goes.
Thanks.
So we're still able to enforce that as intended and still work with that, and the council will still have the final say on those instances. Going back to the relationship between covenants or deed restrictions and really any standards of the town, whether it's subdivision or zoning type standards, they're really two sometimes parallel things. We cannot enforce deed restrictions or covenants. Those are private contracts or agreements made between it could have been set up by a developer, but every property owner who's subject to those has agreed to follow those covenants when they purchased that lot or when they were adopted at a later time through an association or somebody like that. So we cannot enforce theirs. Likewise, they cannot enforce the town's, of course. And so it does. So the way it ends up working for an individual property owner is that technically, if the neighborhood chooses to enforce their covenants, that's the big difference, is who is enforcing it. But otherwise, they're basically subject to the most restrictive of those things. I mean, the town may have a minimum setback standard of 25 feet. We have neighborhoods that have a minimum setback of 30 feet. In those instances, my staff and I would have to issue a permit at 25 feet. We can't, even if we're aware that there's a covenant saying 30, we have to issue it at 25. That's up to the association then to enforce if they have an issue and it's a big issue for them and they want to enforce it. They have to sue to enforce that or seek some other type of legal action to enforce that. So that's kind of how it works.
That's kind of what I thought, but because that's what I was wondering is when those things come into conflict with us, what kind of role, do we play?
And there are state statutes that deal with some of that for the associations, but this Chapter 160D is purely dealing with the authority of the local governments, cities and counties. So this didn't change any of that for associations.
Thank you.
Mr. Hobbs, do you have anything to add to that?
I said it better myself.
Great, thank you.
And Joe, just to clarify, all of the municipalities in the state are going through a similar exercise just to bring everybody sort of under the same umbrella of verbiage and just kind of standardizing some things. So this is something that everyone should be doing?
It's something that everybody is doing. There are actually even a lot of efforts with our North Carolina chapter of the American Planning Association, School of Government, and others have really, over particularly the last year, have put a lot of resources out there to help out community, because there's a lot of municipalities that, that don't have a planner. Their planner is maybe someone that they, go to with the council of governments that they're in or something like that. And their town clerk is the one issuing permits and things like that.
Right.
So they don't have that expertise or time or wherewithal to accomplish this.
Right.
So there's been a lot of ways that different groups have been trying to provide those resources to help those communities. But yes, pretty much everybody is having to change certain aspects of their ordinances. There are communities that, and I would say we're on this end of the spectrum, that really had a lot of the changes already. We've tried to do our best to keep things up to date, with the current standards. We've made changes over the years to do that. So we didn't have to change as much as some other communities that maybe had to catch up on certain things. But otherwise, it is something that pretty much every community is going to have to make amendments if they want to be consistent with it.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions for Joe? Robert, I assume we should handle these as two different motions?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that was my question.
So the first one is actually the ordinance 21-01. I'll entertain a motion on that.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize a public hearing on ordinance 21-01, amending Chapter 156, zoning ordinance of the Town of Duck, North Carolina, for consistency with North Carolina General Statutes, Chapter 160D.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being done, we'll do a roll call vote. Mayor votes aye. Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau?
Aye.
Councilmember Mooney?
Aye.
Councilmember Whitman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavaness?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. I'll entertain a motion on ordinance 21-02.
Do it. Mr. Mayor, I'd like again to make a motion to authorize a public hearing on ordinance 21-02, amending Chapter 155, subdivision ordinance of the Town of Duck, North Carolina, for consistency with North Carolina General Statutes, Chapter 160D.
Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? There being done, we'll do another roll call vote. Mayor votes aye. Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau?
Aye.
Councilmember Mooney?
Aye.
Councilmember Whitman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavaness?
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Joe, for both of those. We're going to go on to item number C, 6C, discussion consideration of authorizing a public hearing on ordinance 21-03, an ordinance to amend subsection 156.124, parentheses C, parentheses 1 of the zoning ordinance establishing allowances for the installation of a post and rail or post and rope structures on dune walkovers in the beach nourishment area. With that, I'll turn over to our Director of Community Development, Joe Hurd.
Okay. Thank you again, Mayor Kingston. Council is familiar with this particular issue, but you may recall it first came up as we began to wind up the Beach Nourishment Project, our original project back in 2017. And we really got to kind of see what that project looked like physically, on the ground. And when we did, we were like, wow, that's pretty high. And that, as it slopes down, that's somewhat steep, going down to this new beach and all of that. And the council had asked staff to really take a close look at that, talk with some folks to, kind of analyze that issue, talk with neighborhood association, things like that, and really see if there was a necessity for something to help associations, property owners in that nourishment area to address getting down to the beach. If you remember with the initial thing, we had a big, wide, big, long, wide beach and all of that, and that was a legitimate concern at the time. So the planning board, we quickly did that review. Planning board made recommendations, and the council adopted an ordinance that is basically what you have right now. And that it created an allowance for people to use to build typical things that you might see, including ramps, walkways, railings, basically anything they wanted to on the west side of the dune coming up that direction. But as they then reached the top of the dune and we got into the areas that are a little bit more sensitive, we had a brand new dune, we had some plantings that were not well established yet, things like that. We wanted to, keep people kind of funneled in areas. We didn't want them running all over all those things. We wanted those to stabilize and help protect that dune system. So the planning board and council took a look at that and limited allowances to a beach matting. So you're familiar with this. We've got in the photograph up there. These are a couple things we looked at, but the matting is the picture on the right there, where that could roll down the hill, give people a much more stable, something more stable to walk on, but did not have any provisions. There were discussions, but no provisions for additional structures as far as that went. We were asked to revisit that after the intent was always to revisit that, even when it was adopted, because we wanted to see how the dune would evolve. Would it reshape itself? Would it become more difficult, or would it become easier for people, depending on how that went? And we did that later that same year in 2017. The planning board did actually make some recommendations, but with some input. We actually had quite an extensive amount of public input. Staff report actually had probably about 4 pages or so of comments from people who had submitted comments related to it. And ultimately, the council decided not to make any changes at that time. And we've had a couple smaller updates where Sandy Cross has come up and talked with you about what we were seeing with the dunes in the system. And that didn't lead us to making any changes to the current ordinance. Recently, the council did ask the staff to take another look due to some comments that you've received from folks about the challenges of looking at dune walkovers. And I'd like to just kind of scroll through these quickly. I've already covered some of the background on these, but this is what we were looking at before the project in those areas. You can see how steep those dunes were and the necessity that we had for structures like you see there as far as steps and things of that nature because it was so steep. Again, this is maybe hard to see here, but that's our dune slope. You can see definitely more gradual at a 5-to-1 slope. Some photographs of that original dune following construction. These were the main reasons why we considered limitations on what could go on the dune, but also the opportunity to provide more convenient beach access. And again, a summary of what was allowed. West side, you could do anything but just matting over the top down to the toe of the dune. Just a picture showing kind of how that matting would work here in the blue on this photo. Again, the blue in the photo there at the bottom right showing how that would work. And then just a couple examples. So this is an example of beach access matting that was installed. And so this brings us up to this point. So again, this chart right here summarizes CAMA will allow any of these options. Someone can get a CAMA permit to do any of these. So the town is the body that's looking at this and how it applies to our community and what we want to see. So in looking at this, focus on the right-hand column there. So right now, as we're looking at again, over the top and down the east side, the only thing we allow is that matting. Under this proposal, we would allow a post and rope type of structure or a post and rail type of structure, and I'll show you what we're looking at that there. So that's how that would change by adding those 2 options. So when we talk about a post and rail system, this is what we're talking about. Okay, we're not talking about something like, the reason I included the picture on the left is because it shows what we won't allow under this ordinance and what we will. So the section that's closest to you in that picture, a little more weathered gray version, you can see there are multiple boards going across. That's going to block sand flow going through it, things of that nature, capture some of that sand and build it up. What is proposed is the extension of that further down where a single rail and posts. Posts would have to be between 6 to 10 feet to support the rail, no closer, no further. And then you can have the rail system itself. But this gives people an opportunity to have more support, upper body support, as they're walking up for access. This would be allowed under the Planning Board's proposal. It would allow a single post and rail structure for individual properties. So any individual owner in the beach nourishment area could put one of these up to help, one side or the other. In the neighborhood or common accesses, the Planning Board is recommending allowing what you see here, where there would be potentially a second post and rail structure as well. So because of the greater use that those see, and you may have people going down and going up at the same time, they felt that that was more appropriate for those circumstances. So again, providing people with some support, particularly as they're going up the dune. The other final option would be post and rope support. So again, this is an existing example that they roll out every year at Ocean Pines. You can see how this is done in concert with the matting. So again, you have a better footing with the matting. This post and rope does not offer, obviously, as much support for someone as they're pulling along. The positive thing that it does, just from the town standpoint in particular, is that it funnels people into this area. So they're not coming down the dune and spreading out into different areas and stepping on beach grass and things like that. So this is very helpful from that standpoint and provides at least a little bit of stability for people going up in those instances. So the point is just allowing these as options that an individual owner or an association could put at their beach access points. Some of the discussion that the Planning Board had at their meeting, there were some things that they had a lot of conversation about that were added into the proposal. So just a couple things that, if we see erosion or migration of the dune, particularly what we'd be talking about would be in a westward motion. In other words, if the dune begins to move back and the structure then begins to be out on the beach, the owner would have to bring that back. They could cut it back and do that, or just remove one section and that type of thing, or move the posts. So, because that was one of the main concerns with having those hardened structures on the beach, is how they impact activities on the beach, the safety of those things, and also as well as our beach maintenance activities, both the large renourishment projects, but also the annual things we do where we found ourselves having to do some grading of accesses. And we wanted those to be convenient and easy for owners to pull up those things, let that activity occur, let it get graded out. And then it's a simple structure and they can just go right back and put it back where it was. So that was one item. And then the second was a suggestion that the board had, And I'll just read this. That any portion of a post and rail or post and rope structure within the area of a beach renourishment or dune maintenance project must be removed by the owner upon notice from the town of Duck prior to initiation of the project. So the question that the board had was whose responsibility would this be? And it was brought up, well, you know, the town can just tear it, if it's in their way, they can just tear it up. And that's not, I think Robert would probably agree that that's probably not a preferred practice. You know, we don't own those structures, and that puts us in a, you know, maybe a precarious legal situation if we are, you know, damaging or, you know, removing even a portion of someone else's structure. So the intent that the board had there was to put the onus on the property owner that if and when those situations arise, it's their responsibility to, you know, pull that back, pull those up. And again, with the simplicity of these structures, it's easy for them to go back and just put that back where it was when that's done. I think that's all I had for you this evening, but be glad to try to explain anything else or answer any questions if the council has any.
I just had a quick question. I think you did a great job of reminding us where we've come on this issue. The 4 feet into the ground that they need to go, I noticed that. But is there any regulation that I may have missed about the height of them? Is it?
There's not.
Okay.
There's not.
Joe, along those same lines, how about width, minimum and maximum of the spread between the posts?
Well, that's 6 and 10. I thought.
We didn't, the board didn't choose to go there. In
So
other
whatever
words,
their
if they
access
wanted
is.
to, the intent is to allow, again, some of the conversation about allowing that second rail for the common or association access would be to have enough room for people to pass going up and down with their equipment. So you may find, you know, it's not intended to be something where they can grab a
Yeah.
rail on each side necessarily like that. So the board didn't decide to do anything with that. If that is something the council wishes us to look at, we can come up with some thoughts or recommendations.
No, I was just curious because it gets too wide, then we're into the dunes, right?
And then the
Yeah, and there's a limitation with
Yeah.
a lot of these, just a functional limitation as far as the width of the easement. You know, an awful lot of these easements are only 10 feet wide or even 15 at the most. So there's really not a lot of room to work with for most of them.
And could I just ask, as an example of how the town would give notice to the subdivision that it was time to remove it? I imagine it would just be, you know, sort of a letter and a decent amount of lead time to, you know, in anticipation of the project coming through, you know, just so that it was something reasonable, so that it wasn't just sort of like, hey, by tomorrow we need it gone, or, you know, that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
in practical standpoint, it's just, hey, we've identified your walkway, little ramp as needing to be removed prior to, and then giving them, you know, a month or two to get it moved. Is that what you're envisioning?
Yeah, and because there was actually some discussion at the planning board regarding that, the level, the board was thoughtful in the way that the proposal would impact the staff and, you know, not place too great a burden on the town as far as notification. Honestly, I don't think this is, you know, just thinking about the types of projects we're talking about, these are things we do anyway right now.
Yeah.
You know, so we're sending, when we do over the winter months, when we have to do the grade, you know, when we see some of the escarpments and we need to grade down so people can safely get back down to the beach, within, you know, they're not all of these are within the
Nourishment.
area. You know, we do that elsewhere as well in some instances. So, you know, we notify we send information out, we get that out. Christian, you know, has that out in, you know, a variety of ways in the town, you know, just general town announcements as well. But we do send those out specifically to those impacted owners and associations. So
Yeah.
we don't think that that's going to place any greater burden on us, and we already are in that mode of, we
Got it.
try to give people the greatest lead time we can. We usually send out one that tells them we're looking at this, toward the end of January, and then the contractor, as we get closer, will fine-tune those dates, and we'll be able to tell them, okay, he's going to start on January 17th, and, and it'll
Yeah.
be, and work his way north from here. So we're already doing that type of thing, so we don't anticipate that'll change the way that we're operating right now.
Thank you. That sounds great.
Joe, just a thought along those same lines, and we got some time to think about this, and you're probably not going to have difficulty with homeowners associations because they've certainly got the wherewithal to do it, but individual homeowners may or may not be there, rental, units and that type of thing. How about looking at a waiver from a standpoint of, give us a waiver because we have to come in and remove that, we're not going to be liable for it, but it's got to be gone. I mean, that would be, you give it a period of time to think about that, and maybe that's more of a legal issue, but
And we can have,
some sort of a
we can
waiver.
have a conversation. I think Mr. Hobbs may be able to contribute some thoughts to that. So that's definitely worthy of some consideration. So we'll take a look at that.
Any other questions for Joe? There being none, I'll entertain a motion to move this to public hearing.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize a public hearing on Ordinance 21-03, establishing allowances for the installation of post and rail or post and rope structures on dune walkovers in the beach nourishment area.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mayor votes aye. Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau?
Aye.
Councilmember Mooney?
Aye.
Councilmember Whitman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanis?
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Joe, for your work and the planning board's work on this one. Many of the public, I think, will be very happy about this. Item number 7, items referred to in presentations from the town attorney. Robert?
Mayor, I don't have anything this evening, but certainly available for any questions.
Thank you. Item number 8, items referred to in presentations from the town manager. Drew?
We have Chief Ackerman, Chief Black, Mr. Hurd, and then Ms. Leggett.
I'm used to seeing daylight out
I know.
when I get to come up. It's good.
Well, a couple of you can change that in a hurry.
All right. All right, hope everybody's having a good evening tonight. I want to talk about a subject that everybody hates, I guess, or loves to talk about, but that's speeding in Duck and violation of traffic laws. So we get a lot of comments, a lot of public misinformation about how traffic laws are enforced and what the implications are for the town and the department. So I want to kind of go through some of these things with you and explain from my perspective why we enforce traffic laws and how that process works. So the primary reason for the enforcement of traffic laws is traffic crash reduction. So we look at all our traffic crashes annually, see where they are, see where the common denominators are, what's causing them, what we're seeing over and over again, and that helps us focus on how we can best reduce speed, and also looking at where our citations are written mostly. We also, pedestrian safety is a huge issue for us with the number of folks that are out biking and walking. Get a lot of citizen complaints about speeding in neighborhoods, motorist education, and then we want to achieve a sustained compliance, which is really difficult given the fact that most of our folks that are here for 6 or 7 days and they leave, may not come back for another year. So we take that into account in everything we do, that there is an education piece to that, and we're try not to be heavy-handed in achieving that sustained compliance. So what I tell my people is we want enforcement actions. Officers have great discretion in North Carolina, so I don't mandate how many tickets they write, what choice they take, whether they write traffic citations or warning tickets or make an arrest. Just so you know, our warning ticket to citation ratio is about 2 to 1. So we write a lot more warning tickets than we do traffic citations. In 2020, which I'll admit was an odd year for a number of reasons with COVID and everything, we wrote 106 citations. So we're not a heavy-handed agency with speeding. We wrote 234 warnings. Just to give you a perspective on how things are picking back up, for the month of April, we wrote over 50 warnings. So we're getting back into the swing of things. We're seeing the problems again, heavy traffic volume, so we're out there enforcing it and putting an emphasis on it. So one of the biggest things, one of the reasons we have a unified fleet, one of the reasons we stop violators is when we're on the side of the road with that person, all the traffic that passes has no idea what's happening in that interaction. In fact, it may have nothing to do with traffic whatsoever, but it's a reminder to everybody to slow down. So our mere presence is a great deterrent to speeding, whether that's stopping somebody on the side of the road or just being visible throughout the town. So we get asked all the time, you know, is duck a speed trap? And I'll explain that in a minute, but the money in North Carolina is constitutionally mandated. Any fine has to go to the public school system, and that money is used specifically to maintain free public schools in North Carolina. So not a dime of a traffic fine goes back to the municipality or the state. Court costs, that's the other thing. We don't set them. The legislature every year meets, and I've seen them go up and up and up. And I just gave you a little bit of breakdown here. So for a typical misdemeanor traffic offense, the cost of court's $193. So it's a huge expense to somebody, and that breaks down, as you see in the chart. So the bulk of it goes to operate the Court of Justice or the General Court of Justice in North Carolina, to maintain the facilities, telecommunications and data transmission for all the state, and that includes the e-citation program and other things that the state oversees. $7.50 goes to the Retirement and Insurance Fund. $3 goes to fund our Criminal Education and Training Standards Commission. $2 goes to legal representation for indigent defendants, and a $5 service of process fee for every citation, and then a $2 support fee that funds our state's DNA database and data bank. And then finally, the state has added, recently as a few years ago, a $10 levy to every traffic citation that involves a Chapter 20 or a traffic-related offense. So one of the biggest things I see every time there's a picture of something, or every time somebody gets it, not every time, but a lot of times people get speeding tickets from out of town, I get nasty emails from them that duck's operating a speed trap. So I'm here to tell you unequivocally that is not the case. So if you look at the citations we wrote last year, a $5 fee, service fee, comes back to the town for every case where the court assigns a court cost, and that's whether they're found guilty, plead guilty, or no contest. So it's not even in all the cases. But if you looked at the citations we wrote last year, we brought back about $530 for the town. You compare that doesn't even pay for the annual calibration that costs us nearly $800 of all our radar units. A typical radar unit in a car is over $3,000. Officers have to attend training for that every year. So there is no financial incentive whatsoever to the Town of Duck Police Department or the Town of Duck to issue traffic citations. So we do it 100% to make Duck a safer place to live and visit. That's our only motivation. No other factor comes into that for us. So I'm happy to be able to tell people that when they respond and complain. And I know it's unfortunate to get traffic tickets, and no one likes it. I've gotten speeding tickets in the past. In fact, one of my officer's fathers wrote me the only 2 speeding tickets I've ever had. So it's tough every time to look at him, but he was a heavy-handed trooper. So I do understand that, but I did want to explain, because that's one of the things we hear a lot about traffic. So you will see our numbers go up. I have asked all my officers to try and make 2 traffic enforcement actions every day. That can be warnings, 1,000 warnings a month. I want them to be out there, I want them to be visible, I want them to make sure that the roads are safe and our accident rate is going down. So if you see more activity, that's what's going on with that. And of course, every month I'll report exactly how that breaks down to you. Moving on, our call volume, as you can see, April was still a COVID territory last year, so we're, as you can see out there, making a big change in our numbers, but overall, not too far up for the year, but we can definitely detect the increase in population out there. So as I said, traffic actions are up 52 for the month. We had 4 traffic crashes, 678 business checks, only 10 residential extra patrol checks were requested, and we made 4 arrests this month. So most of those were DWI arrests. This is another large problem we're starting to see. I wanted to come back. I had mentioned.
Can I ask you a question about that? The DWIs, is there any rhyme or reason to the time of day?
No, I can definitively tell you there's not. Just looking at the different cases, each one's a little different, but one thing, our officers are better trained than they ever were in the past. It used to be you were told not to look for intoxicated drivers during the day. It didn't happen. And that is completely false. So a lot of that thinking has changed. They're out there, but in a number of these cases, we've received calls from the public about somebody driving erratically or something going on, and that's what initially drew our attention to that person. But I can tell you in 2 of those daytime arrests that we had, the driver wasn't just intoxicated, they were way over the legal limit, so pretty significant. I can't put my finger on exactly why we're beginning to see an uptick. I have theories on it, but I certainly can't prove, there's no evidence to prove any of them, but we are seeing a lot more of that. And I don't know if it's less going out to restaurants and people are drinking at home over longer periods of time and then getting out on the road versus going to dinner and maybe having a drink or 2, but we're definitely seeing an uptick. So it's something we're very aware of.
Thank you.
In the previous month, I told you that we'd had some issues detected in some of the data from our LPRs and our traffic speed signs. So we went back and did some random sampling to try and get a hold on just how much of an inaccuracy we're seeing. So with free-flowing traffic, cars moving right by, we're seeing about a 20% what we call a double read or a triple read. And the reason for that is pretty simple. An LPR system is designed to look for alphanumeric characters. It doesn't see vehicles as vehicles or people as people. In fact, if you had a mobile LPR system and it passes a fence, sometimes it'll identify the fence posts as I's or H's, because that's all it's looking for. So it's up to the operator to determine whether those reads are correct or not. So it's not really a traffic counting tool. It provides a pretty good idea of numbers, but we really see the problems compound when we have traffic congestion. If you'll think of a Kellogg's truck coming by with all the writing on it, if that's coming through our intersection, coming into town, and it's stop-and-go traffic, that camera is going to continue to see that truck repeatedly. And each time it takes a picture, it's going to pull different letters and numbers off of it and try to see if those are combinations of license plates. So that one truck may result in 8 or 9 reads. Those aren't actually individual cars that are going through. So we want to be accurate for a number of reasons. There's a lot of projects that we have going on that are dependent on our traffic flow. As we talk about the Mid-Currituck Bridge and traffic flow problems that are coming through Duck and where they actually originate, where the problems are, it's really important for us to be able to say, X number of cars entered town, X number of cars went out, and vice versa. So that was one of the things that we really, when we built the LPR program, we wanted to be able to do. So we've discontinued our data collection service for our radar speed signs. 2 of the 4 had that. It was costing us about $3,000 a year to do that. So we've discontinued that, saving $6,000 over this fiscal year and next. And we've begun to research technology that will allow us to have as accurate car counting as possible. So Drew put us in touch with some folks in Apex that we were able to talk to, and that kind of expanded us to look at some other places. And there's some relatively new technologies that are actually pretty affordable, and they basically are set in the roadway. They're sometimes called pucks or something similar. But they were always a temporary measure. So there's a number of companies now that are making a more permanent sensor that goes in the road. In fact, one we looked at today has a 10-year battery on it. So we put it in, epoxy it in, forget it, and then it uses Bluetooth technology to pull that data off. So it not only tells us the cars that go by, it also tells us the speeds of every vehicle. So it would provide us with a lot of information. So that's what we're pursuing. We hope to turn that money that we were paying for this inaccurate data into much more accurate data for a number of town reasons. So I hope to be able to come back to you with something relatively soon on that, hoping that we can do that within our existing budget and wouldn't have to ask for anything additional to do that. So you may see us test some things and demo some things out over the next few months to see what we can see with that stuff. So I'm going to continue to provide the LPR data to the public, but I am going to put a disclaimer up on the website this week that just explains how LPRs work and why these numbers are not 100% accurate. And that inaccuracy can go both ways. It can be an underread or an overread. So I just want folks to be careful of it. But I think the picture it gives you is still accurate and correct. You see the volumes of cars changing over time and seasonally. So that data will continue to be up there for everybody. Lastly, before I ask if there are any questions, I just want to convey to council, to Drew, to my coworkers, fire chief, it's a tough time to be a cop in America. Not that it's ever been easy, but there's a lot of councils, a lot of elected officials that have seemingly to us turned their backs on us. And we know it's a tough time. We know there's change that needs to be made in our profession. And believe me, there's nobody that wants bad apples out or changes made more than us. And it's just to have a council that's supportive of us and is kind to us, it means all the world to all of us as officers. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I have a happy staff, and the reason they're happy is that they know that they have administrators and leaders that have their back. So I appreciate that. Any questions?
Well, Chief, we appreciate those comments for sure. Going back to the court costs, over and above that, then are the fines. If it's if someone's fined in Dare County, does that necessarily go to Dare County schools, or does that go to a state fund and then allocated back?
That is a phenomenal question, because I spent an hour and a half trying to answer that question. If you read the Constitution letter for letter, it would appear that the state has to reappropriate it. I can't get an honest answer, but I'm going to continue to try, because my gut tells me it's probably dispersed at the state level, because if you have a large county like Wake or Mecklenburg, just by sheer numbers, they're going to generate a lot more money. You can also look at it by sheer numbers. They have far more schools and need more funding. So it is a great question. I wasn't able to come up with a definitive answer, so I'm going to have to ask. But
No, we don't collect the fines, though. They're collected by the court system.
It's all collected by the state, and I assume there has to be some reappropriation at some level, but what mechanism there is for that is unclear, at least on all the public data I could find. So.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
But it's nice to know that the funds do go to public education. And do you ever get any emails back after you've explained it where they go, oh, okay, I feel better?
It's rare, I'll be honest, but I've gotten a few where they said, you're right. You know, I guess that's something we all get to deal with. But interestingly enough, on the school things, a lot of things in North Carolina are designed that way. So if we have found property, for instance, and we get to the end of the year and we have to sell that, all that money goes to Dare County directly. We actually have to cut them a check. And Anna McGinnis there was great. She used to be my deputy town manager in Nags Head, but she'd always say, you're the only ones that ever give us any money. So I don't know if everybody was doing it wrong or just didn't have any found property, but she loved us. So.
Chief, I have one more question for you that no one else does. Obviously, issues in Elizabeth City in our backyard. How prepared are we from a standpoint of equipment, shields, whatever?
Great question. So we've had several really good meetings with the sheriff and other chiefs recently about that. In fact, the day that the incident occurred, the sheriff called an emergency meeting and we met almost immediately about that. We're, as the chiefs, I speak for the chiefs and the sheriff on this, we had gone to great lengths to put together a civil unrest team across North Carolina, and that was the brainchild of the North Carolina Sheriff's Association. And we all deferred buying equipment and doing things because there was this plan to have a standardization of what we were going to buy, what we were going to equip. Everybody was going to go to FEMA-sponsored training so that if you had 100 officers from all over the state, everybody would be
Makes
trained and
sense,
equipped
yeah.
the same. And I don't blame the Sheriff's Association so much, but like a lot of great plans, nothing ever came of it. And we had great initial meetings, and then that was it. So we were all faced with, okay, here's something close to home. How are we going to respond to this? And you know, it's the same old inventory of equipment. We have a few things, Southern Shores has a few things, Nags Head, and you know, collectively, I don't think we're in a position that we should be, but on the same token, we don't want to be over-prepared, if that makes sense. You know, we don't want to go to great expense to buy things that wouldn't be practical. In this particular case, the collective decision was made not to send officers to Elizabeth City to help. It was our growing season here. We felt that it was more important for officers to stay here in Dare County, and every single agency in Dare County now has openings. So there's a personnel shortage, there's problems, so that's why we didn't respond. But Eddie Buffalo, the chief of Elizabeth City, is the president of our Chiefs Association, so of course I know him well. Phil Webster, and Nags Head chief, is the regional representative. So we've been in very close contact, but I hope that maybe this is the catalyst to get those talks going again, and that we can get back to coming up with a standardized plan. So I wish I could give you a better answer, but it's certainly not where I think we should be.
Thank you, Chief. Any additional questions for Chief?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Good evening again. I'm here to present the April activities for the Duck Fire Department, and we'll start with the data first. And this was the data I assumed we would see going into the spring. We'll start with year-to-date. We've had 87 calls, and you can see from 2020 to 21, last April, obviously, when we were at the peak of COVID, so you can see that drop significantly with calls. So then when you look at the month itself of April, you can really see the dip from last year. We only had 9 calls in the month of April compared to 30 this year. So clearly you can see it with this slide, the changes from last year. The way they break out, 14 EMS calls, so roughly about half of our call volume, which you would expect, and then a smattering of others, a few motor vehicle collisions that I think Chief already addressed, and pretty much the typical breakout there, as you will see with my pie chart. There it is. So again, about half the calls are EMS related. So when you look at April activities, we had total incidents of 30. We had 12 fire inspections and 481 training hours. I should be reporting out to you at the June meeting that in May we will have finished the fire inspections for the year. Significant training for the month was extrication training, and I will show you a couple pictures from that. We brought in a company that actually brought in battery-operated extrication tools. So back when I was talking about CIP and extrication, we don't change out our tools all the time. They last for a while. We are at the 20-plus year mark for some of our extrication tools. So one of the things we're looking at with our CIP money is to transition potentially to battery-operated tools. The technology's changed a lot, much better than they used to be. But there's a larger significance of just changing out tools. When we start to look at this, it has impacts on our next engine. Because to run our other tools, we have to put reels in the engines. There's a lot of plumbing that goes with it and power that's required that we won't need in a future engine, which will also decrease the cost of the engine. So it's a double whammy there. So we are looking at that. It was great training. We got to play with these tools, and I think the best part of this training was The majority of the folks that could come out on that Saturday were volunteers, and they got to use them and really have some input around it. So it's just something we're looking at as we're going forward. Again, it would be covered with anything we've already asked for, but that transition has a double positive for us in changing how we operate on scene and also decreasing what we need in the next engine. More importantly, open firefighter EMT process, we're in it right now. After reviewing all the applications, we had 6 were invited to complete the physical agility assessment or to come try it out. All 6 did complete. Drew had a chance to come yesterday and see that in action. From that, we have a panel that was assessing them. I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute. So on May 12th, the morning of May 12th, we're going to interview 4. There will be a panel interview, and then they will come to me for a chief's interview. From there, we'll rank them and then get with Drew and hopefully be able to offer towards the end of the week, depending when we can get Drew with our candidate of choice, if not 2. So he can have a choice. But hopefully by next week, we can be narrowing that down, and this is for the open position from Spencer. So what I thought I'd do with that, so you understand how we hire and what we look for, the first piece is, for us, our physical agility assessment. And there's 9 stations to that. So what I thought I'd do is quickly just show you some pictures of what we're looking for from our candidates. What we expect of them are basic firefighter skills that they could be expected to do on day 1. So we're not asking them to be anything more than at least basically skilled to run what is our ultimate call, a fire scenario. So we have 9 stations, and I'm just going to quickly run through them, but with pictures and not words. So I'll start. The first station is donning full PPE and SCBA. The candidate gets in that box, is dressed in street clothes, and we ask them to completely dress for the activity. And we have Jose as my model for these. We had him run through for us. So this is Jose getting all his gear on. We ask him to put everything on, including an air pack. They're not breathing air at this point. The second station they go to is they pull that 5-inch hose. They have to wrap the hydrant. And they have to pull it a certain distance. From there, they wrap the hydrant. They have to open the hydrant completely and then grab this charged hose line. It's 150 feet of charged hose line, and they have to take it to a coned area, so they take it a certain distance. Then they drop that down. Then they grab a 24-foot ladder, and we ask them to do a single firefighter raise. We will assist them if they need assistance, but ideally we need them to put that ladder on the side of the building and raise it. They then walk to a different station, where is our forcible entry station. So this would happen, we get to a home, we know people are inside, the door's locked, they need to be able to force a door. Once they get in the door, they put on full air pack. They're now breathing with air, and they go into a small area where they do a primary search so that they're looking for any potential victims. It's simulated. We have them enter. We have a little training tower, what we call the training tower. It's small inside the bay. So on the picture on the left, we ask them to enter what is a small room and simulate that they need to get out, and they only have a small area to do it. It's called a reduced profile maneuver. So if they are skinny enough and can get out with the air pack on, by God, go for it. The idea here is, what if they were to get trapped and only had a small opening, how can they get out? Most folks, like Jose is showing here, they have to remove their pack to make that maneuver. So we're seeing how well they can do that. Do they panic? Can they get out? And then finally, the 50-foot dummy drag. Of course, I use Jose to demonstrate this, who doesn't need to drag. He just picked the thing up and ran with it. Most people do drag it. Jose doesn't need to do that. So that's the first part. If they can get through our physical skills assessment, we will then set them up with there's a time limit. There are some things we look at with that, and then we'll set them up with interviews. The interviews is where we really find out, are they going to fit duck? Do they have the desire to really be a firefighter, 1, a firefighter in duck 2? So we look at all that once we get to the interview, which will be next Wednesday. But just to give you an idea of what we do look for there. We're not asking them to do anything that doesn't come with certification, and we're not asking them to do anything that doesn't come with what we expect the first day. Our volunteer firefighters that are going in the buildings can do this as well. So the other thing I wanted to do, because we talk so much about needing career staffing and personnel, but we have to remember Duck Fire is 39 years old this year, and they'll be 40 next year when the town is 20, that I wanted to take the opportunity over the next several months and start highlighting some of our volunteers. So tonight and I'm doing it by how long they've been in. These will just be quick, but I think it's important that we don't forget that we can't do what we do without both sides of the house. And so tonight I'd like to start doing that, and I think you'll recognize the faces that you'll see. Pat Scarlett's been with us for 23 years. She's our current chairperson of the board and a support firefighter. 23 years of service. On the left, she's the one hands on the shoulder of someone doing an exterior firefighter attack or a fire attack, and at points in Pat's career with us, she could pull that line and assist with that. She has earned the right to be the chairperson and support at a lesser level, and we appreciate her leadership. She's a great leader for the fire department. Secondly, I'll highlight tonight is Rick Fagerston, also 23 years. So these two folks, with the exception of myself as a volunteer and then, obviously my transition to chief, they are the oldest still serving and committing to the community members at this point. So Rick, with 23 years in, he did go through and get his North Carolina Firefighter 1 certification, and he was one of our best engineers. And I have a great picture of him, which I will find and get in a presentation of him climbing up on the apparatus. But he had a lot to do with maintaining our fleet prior to having career staffing and all. He used to jump out of airplanes. He's lived a long, healthy, active life. He now serves in a very supportive role. So he still carries a pager. If we get a bad call, what he'll do is come to the station and sit at the desk and answer the phone day or night and help us with truck checks. He's our past treasurer and served that role for many years. So again, I'll do a couple folks every month just so that you realize the other side, and it takes a village, literally, and I think it's time that I recognize them as we move forward. And then yesterday was May the 4th be with you, but it was also International Firefighters Day. This day started in, I believe, 1999 in Australia after 5 firefighters were lost in a bushfire. And so this is a nationally recognized day, a world recognized day, and I just wanted everyone to know that that was yesterday. And lastly, when I was looking around, this is from Niagara Falls, and this is what Niagara Falls did to honor yesterday's International Firefighter Day. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Don. I have a quick question about the candidates. Just so I'm clear, the basic amount of training that the candidates would have, that would include going in and being a suppression firefighter? Yes. Okay, yes. So they have to have that with the air pack, yes, and all that stuff. Yes, so they're either have their certification or finishing their certification. Once in a while, especially, and Drew and I have had this talk, we know who's around in town, and we know who, they're just finishing up the firefighter 1 and 2 now, so there might be someone that will finish in like a month, but they'll meet the requirements within 6 months, yes. I thought that was it, but I just thought I'd ask. Thank you. Great question.
Chief, I have one for you. Maybe switch it up a little bit, but
sure.
We had a public comment tonight about the ambulance service, and I know we don't control what the county does, but what's the latest conversation with EMS with respect to the summer coming?
Sure. So the EMS strategy is in place 24/7, 365. So if we have any situation that's going to cause a high volume of traffic, if we have a situation, the best example is a bad storm coming in and the sound is going to block near sunset as usual, we can make that call and say, hey, we really think you should move an ambulance. That's in place no matter what. I have already, and I did not know about the public comment coming, I've already reached out to Chief Collins prior to that and asked, the way the strategy was working is, especially between Memorial Day and Labor Day, if we saw a need for the ambulance moving because of traffic on the weekends, we could call. And then if they had the availability, they would come. If they had to shift out, they would shift out depending on what's going on in the county. I've asked to change that. I would like to be standing order that they come at a designated time, Saturday and Sunday mornings, to a designated time, Saturday and Sunday evenings. I've asked for that. I'm just waiting to hear back from her. That's my preference, is that it just be a standing order. I think that would make, one, me more comfortable, and I know it would make the community more comfortable. So I'll report back to Drew and you all as soon as I hear from her.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions for Chief? Thank you very much.
All right, Mayor and Council. Begin as I usually do, just covering some sort of facts and figures for the month, and there's nothing changing. We're still on that upward trend. If you'll recall, we had points during this over the past year where we were trending behind, particularly on the trade permits. What you can see now, for the month, we had another, and again, we had a big year last year, which was up 21% from April last year, and it's now put us in a position we're up 11% for the fiscal year so far. So this is going all the way back to July. And you look at those trade permits that for the longest time were actually less than they had been the previous year. And look at what happened this past month, where we issued over twice as many as we had the previous year. So, and that's actually now brought up to the point where it's, those are actually higher percentage-wise than the general building permits. So again, what we're seeing is a tremendous amount of activity, similar to a lot of the real estate and development things we've talked about. We're still seeing very high levels of activity, of investment in our community. And again, that, just said it before, but that tells me that you're doing something right. If people are looking at your community and looking at it and saying it's worthwhile, this is where I want to put my money to improve my property here, I think that speaks for itself. So just looking at, we had a lot of activity this month on the northern part of town. So you see some areas up there in Sanderling, some of the neighborhoods just north of Carolina Dunes in there, and then down in the Snow Geese, Norbanks kind of area in there. So several strong clusters of activity. A little more spread out in the southern part there, just things happening everywhere down there. No particular cluster to identify. Did just want to identify for you a few of the significant projects. We had another 3 housing starts. For those who have not poked your head into the, I think it's our most recent subdivision there at Duck Ridge Village Court. We now have 3 new houses being built after probably only having, I'm not sure there were any more than 3 houses back there prior to this, but we have 3 that are being constructed simultaneously and will be over the next, just say 3 to 4 months. You're going to see a lot of activity in that neighborhood there. The other one is on Bayberry Drive, a little more significant. One of the things to look at on these, that both of the ones in at Duck Ridge Village Court are relatively modest-sized houses, a 3-bedroom and a 4-bedroom house.
I was noticing that, and they certainly have the capacity to be a lot larger on those lots.
They do. They do. Yeah, they actually have a minimum house size in there and all that. So it's, yeah. So anyway. Just a couple other ones, 100 South Snow Geese, 110 Wampum Drive with some significant renovation, expansion projects, and then one more at 122 J Crest as well. That's more combination repair and rehabilitation. So that covers the basic kind of, where we're at, what's going on right now. And we'll transition into the main presentation here, just kind of covering some of the projects that we're working on, some of the initiatives going on townwide to keep you in the loop. First of which, if you have not been right next door. You can almost, almost see it out the window here if it wasn't for that big piece of equipment right there. We have installed the initial installation of our rain garden and wetland. That has been completed. I did use that adjective initial because we are going to be evaluating, and we already know there's going to be a couple things we're going to tweak with this. The little channel that enters off of the road, you may notice if you're looking carefully at it, it still goes up a little bit, it angles up. That's intentional for now. I went out there and, it doesn't look right to me, and they said, well, no, that's, what they don't want, we don't want, until the plants establish themselves, get a good chance to root, we don't want the water flowing in there fast. So we didn't want to create a channel where the water's going to rush in. So we did leave it like that. Obviously, as you can see from the picture I took this morning, it's still collecting quite a bit of water in there. You can see right here at the bottom picture, the very, very minimal amount of water collected there at the intersection. That would have been 10 times that large going out into the edge of almost to the edge of the road in the past. But you can see how that, runs down that channel into there. We are working with Christian on developing some interpretive signage to let people know, what is this thing I'm seeing and what is it doing? What's its purpose? And so she's getting some thoughts together on that. And we're working the Dare County Soil and Water Conservation, who provided a modest grant to help fund this, has also expressed an interest, even said they will pay for part of that signage as well, because that really helps them achieve their goal of greater public knowledge and recognition of these types of projects and encouraging people to consider this on their own personal properties. So that's something you'll see in the future. So we will be evaluating it, but it is in place. When the water is down, you will see a channel that meanders around like what you see in the upper picture there. That does exist. It's just covered in water after the storm last night. So you'll have an opportunity to see that, and it'll continue to look better as the plants mature. A couple other things you're going to be seeing shortly. We have a couple of water level gauges, curiously enough, coming from two different sources. So the first of these is from the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association. That is a national organization. And what they're looking at with this is doing more local water gauges. There's a national program that I'll talk about in just a minute, but they're looking at filling in gaps, having every community have these gauges where they can, see the impacts that sea level rise and storms and things like that are having on the water level and the sound. So what we're looking at with this, they basically have funded we can call it it's not technically a grant, but they basically assumed the vast majority of the cost. This only costs the town $500 for a $3,000 gauge. Once it's delivered, the town will install this, and we'll be looking, I think, for this gauge, probably looking at something further up in the Sanderling area, talking to the resort about the possibility of locating this on their pier or one of the other things up there. It would be attached to that. It'll generate data that we can access electronically, so that's helpful. Curiously enough, we have another gauge arriving shortly as well. This is it's called a Feynman water level gauge, and I had to write this one down, the Flood Inundation Mapping and Alert Network. So this is a nationwide thing. They have these gauges through a lot of the coastline, but also in a lot of rivers. So this is something that you might even see inland of things. This is a much larger gauge. You can see here in the photo, this is one, we got a photo from the town of Oriental, just down the coast. And you have a piece of equipment on that pole, the narrow pole kind of in the center of the picture there. And then the gauge itself is attached to the pier. We're looking at this one being somewhere in and along the boardwalk, most likely. And then we're also looking at an opportunity, though, as we do our brick project with the living shoreline, at putting one over there eventually as well. So this is going to give us some really good information and hopefully help you as you look at making decisions regarding things like coastal resilience in the future. This one we're getting free. So this one is being provided by the state Division of Water Resources, or Division of Public Safety, and they will be the ones installing it. But that'll probably be before we meet again if they're on schedule.
Joe, could I ask a question about
Sure.
those?
Sure.
I guess I would ask, are we going to get the data from that one too? I would
Yes.
imagine.
Yes.
And then how does it work? I mean, this one in Oriental, so I imagine they have the same, and they've taken this into consideration, but I don't know if you know, our varying degree of water level change in the sound because it's a wind-driven tide. So I was curious as to, is it just going to kind of be interesting data because it'll have, sort of high levels and low levels that are going to be interesting because it just changes so rapidly all the time, the
And
water
you'll
level.
see that, but that's exactly the intent of what it's measuring, is the impacts of this. So we'll be able to, and I say we, I'm not going to say that it'll be necessarily a member, of our staff doing this type of level of analysis, but probably more someone in the academic field, can take the weather patterns and and help us determine, okay, so if this is occurring, this is what we can expect. And it's giving us data where we can kind of match that. And, over the years, these are the kind of things that have really helped us define, 50 years ago, hurricanes, they didn't have a lot of warning. You didn't really know what was going to happen. Nowadays, we're in a pretty good situation as far as being able to know to some degree, what's going to be impacted. Eventually, this is going to have those types of benefits for us.
That makes
where
sense.
we're able to
Thanks.
better plan and respond to things that are occurring because we're able to see what's happening and understand what the impacts are likely to be for us.
Okay, thanks.
So it is intended to pick up those things, those oddities, the discrepancy, those unique patterns. That's part of the intent. Beach nourishment, not a whole lot to update on this, other than I'm just going to focus on the last point. The schedule's still the same. We're still on track for that. But did want to point out, we are still working toward obtaining construction access easements. Unfortunately, Corps of Engineers has given us a fairly definitive letter saying no. We're denying this. We don't feel that it's consistent with our mission here at the field research facility. And so we're taking a harder look at the other options that we've already been pursuing. We have had some success with a couple of neighborhood associations, so we're going to be able to, we think we're going to be able to work something out, but there's a lot of details that go into that because obviously any association is concerned about the impacts that kind of traffic, that heavier traffic, is going to have for their neighborhood. So something we're continuing to work on, but I did want to give you that update.
Yeah.
Who was the letter from? Was it from Jeff Waters or was it higher?
No,
higher up?
Mr. Waters had given us a letter a few months back, also, stating his objections. This came, Drew, do you recall the signator? Walmsley, Dr. Walmsley, who was a gentleman who we actually had the opportunity to meet. Drew and Sandy took a good amount of time to have a good conversation with him when they had the ribbon cutting for the new facility there. So we felt good that, we had that opportunity to kind of talk with them, explain some things. But after going back and evaluating, we followed up with a letter making that request to him because he was another step up the ladder. And anyway, that's what we got back from him. So, going on right now, beginning today and running through Friday, we have our National Planning Conference for the American Planning Association. The wonderful thing, this is one of the few benefits COVID has brought us, is that this is the format of this conference, again this year, is a virtual conference. So while we're not able to head up to Boston to visit up there and learn a little about that community directly, it does allow us the opportunity, once again, last year we had all 5 planning board members. This year we have 4 of the members who are able to attend many of this conference. We couldn't afford to do that otherwise, and they probably couldn't take off all the time necessary to do that otherwise. But with a virtual format, we have 4 board members as well as Sandy Cross and I who are attending this conference and, doing kind of stuff in between in and out and focusing on the sessions that'll have the most value for us. But over a 3-day period, they have 133 sessions. So this year, last year they had to shift into it at the last minute. They only had 1 session at a time. This year they have a bunch of concurrent sessions, as many as 3 or 4 at a time. So we're able to pick and choose which ones are most relevant for us.
Great.
One of the interesting things is they did have several particular focus tracks, and one of those is resiliency planning. So it's right in our wheelhouse. So had some great ones on that topic so far. And did also want to mention, I believe Sandy had talked with y'all before about the Floodplain Managers Conference, at which she and some other folks from the Outer Banks were making a presentation related to how we dealt with the flood maps and in our flood damage prevention ordinance, those types of things. And Duck was asked again. We were recognized as being a community that's on the forefront of coastal resilience. A lot of the agencies are like what we're doing. And we were asked to participate in a presentation that's actually going to come up on Tuesday of next week at the Carolinas Climate Resilience Conference. Just focusing on North and South Carolina, although there are participants particularly from all along the East Coast. But we are the local community that they picked out to focus on our efforts, what we've done with some of our planning efforts, as well as what we're implementing and what we're about to implement as it relates to coastal resiliency. So we're getting, again, some good positive recognition there and a nice opportunity for us to share that story with other communities as well.
That's a nice logo.
That's terrific.
I like that graphic, too. That's kind of a neat graphic that they put together.
Yeah.
Congratulations for
Congrats.
that.
All right. Well, that's to everybody. That's not just us. So thank you all as well. I did want to just mention a couple other little minor things that weren't even significant enough to plug in here. You may notice if you walk along the sidewalk just south of here, there's a couple areas where if you're looking in the landscape beds, you'll see something a little different. And that's intentional. We're working with our contractor at Emerald Forest in the village we've done some test things, one containing a gravel surface, another containing mulch, and what we've done is add a coating to it that sprays over, that's supposed to make it, so it doesn't erode away as quickly. So we created these 2 little test plots just to get a feel as to whether that's going to be an option for us in the future where we're able to make those beds look a little better, function a little better with mulch or gravel, and I say gravel, it's a small, like pea gravel kind of thing. So just, those are test plots. So just in case you hear about those or anybody asks you about them, that's the intent of that. If we're looking at doing something on a larger scale, we'll certainly come back to you to let you know how that went. And finally, wanted to give some kudos to our staff. Steve McMurray recently had a knee injury, and as part of our conversations in how to best deal with that situation, we talked about, and I'll say with great expediency, quicker than I thought, Kay Nickens, Steve McMurray, Sandy Cross, Kim Pittman, all got together and really came up with a plan on how to address this and work with it in the short term, but it also gives us an opportunity for doing this in the long term. But what we're looking at is a program that will allow us to do virtual inspections. And when I say that brings up all kinds of questions, but what we're looking at is we're not looking at a contractor sending us, oh yeah, I did that. What we're looking at in this case is another staff member going out, knowing what to look for, documenting it with photographs, sending those to Steve, who can then remotely say, yeah, that looks good, or, no, we need to have them do this, that kind of thing. So it's just a way for us to keep, again, with the amount of development we're seeing, we need to keep all this rolling, particularly at this time of year when everybody is looking at finishing things off and getting it rented.
Yeah.
So it's very important for us to continue to provide that level of service, and I just really wanted to commend all of them for putting that program together very quickly and coming up with it's a great idea, out of the box, and
Great.
I appreciate their efforts in that regard, but just wanted you to know that as well.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Joe? Very good, Joe. Congratulations,
Congrats,
you and
Joe.
your team, on a lot of your successes.
All right, good evening, council, and everyone watching at home. And thank you, Donna, for pressing the button for me. She's learning to run the cameras tonight. So let's jump right into what everyone's waiting to hear about, I'm sure, is the new executive order that just came out concerning COVID requirements. So I just wanted to go over this really briefly because obviously I'm going to talk about events after this, so everyone's on the same page. Beginning April 30th, that's when the order went into effect. The outdoor mask requirement was lifted, although there is an encouragement if you're in a large crowd where social distancing is difficult to still wear a mask. Indoor masks remain required if non-family members are present. Gathering limits have been increased to 100 indoors and 200 outdoors. The business occupancies remain the same as earlier executive orders, and this one is in effect until June 1st. So what happens June 1st? I am not qualified to answer this question, but I'm going to do my best. Per the governor and his press release, if 2/3 of eligible North Carolinians are vaccinated with at least their first shot, and by eligible, I mean at whatever age they can get, which was 16, I think now is being taken down to 12. And if trends remain stable, then all mask mandates will be lifted. Other public health recommendations will ease. Those are not spelled out yet. And until then, everyone is encouraged to continue practicing the 3 Ws. So one of the things that was mentioned in the press release was that the state is still monitoring COVID-19 and more contagious variants that do exist in North Carolina, which is why it's important to keep following the 3 Ws, the wear, wait, and wash, until we get another look at those, excuse me, at those trends later this month. As I head into talking about events a little bit, Betsy and I did meet with other municipal event planners, a health department representative, and Outer Banks Visitors Bureau and the chamber yesterday. So this is the same meeting that we've had a few times as the executive orders have changed, and we brought it up again. We'll meet again at the very beginning of June once we hear at the end of May what's coming out next. So we'll continue to do that throughout the summer, and we'll continue to talk to Dare County Department of Health and Human Services as we move forward. So jumping right into events based on the information that we have and the information that we talked about during our meeting yesterday. Our plans for June are mostly the same. In June, we have virtual fitness scheduled on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, starting mid-June, which is our typical start date. Some really great things about the virtual fitness are that it's adaptable, which means we can do it virtually, in person, or in a hybrid fashion, which would be some people coming to the green and doing it in person, and also us broadcasting it for people who chose to participate virtually. So pending state information, one of our first steps will be at the end of May, beginning of June, based on what the governor says. We may put out a social media poll to our visitors asking what they might like to see for those first few times of fitness. And so probably the two options we would give is, does anyone want to come in person? If so, we'll switch to a hybrid. And if no one really wants to come yet in person, we'll stick virtual. So that would be our first step, is just to kind of poll everyone. We do think some people are going to want to come, but that's why we're really happy with having these local instructors, because we can easily shift to a hybrid version if we'd like. So in July, we're still looking at proposed items here, and this is pretty much what we've talked about in our last meetings. If we can, we'll move to live fitness. Again, we have a lot of flexibility there, so we can stay with hybrid if necessary. And for 4th of July, we have rolled out, Betsy has been rolling out to all the businesses the information about the 4th of July display contest. So we plan to hold that right now tentatively June 14th to July 9th. We'll be creating a map and an online voting platform. So the award categories you'll see on the left here are the most patriotic shopping center, window display, in-store display, and food or beverage. So Betsy came up with these categories after talking to some of the different businesses we have in town, and realizing, right, that a restaurant might not do a window display, but they may have a really cool daiquiri that's red, white, and blue, or something like that. So we want to give people the option, businesses the option to participate in the way that's best for their business. We would also have a People's Choice Award and a Mayor's Award, of course. And like I said, we'll be building an online platform for people to be able to vote. We hope to have the map all electronically too, so the stores will be given a poster with the QR code. We'll have information obviously on our outlets, and people can scan it and be taken to a page that takes them to a Google map and then also links them to voting. So we would plan to announce the businesses that won that July 12th, that following Monday. Any questions about 4th of July before I go? Okay. So August still being proposed here. We think we'll be able to move to live fitness then. We do have other live things kind of lined up. We have some magic tentatively scheduled, some concerts tentatively scheduled, and some other local events like the aquarium when they bring their live animals. We have those tentatively scheduled. So we have flexibility there as well. Some of these, while we have them on the books kind of in pencil, as we move forward through the months, we can turn that into pen or marker. Some of the in-person considerations that we are still thinking about is that we probably want to make sure we still provide adequate space. We want to make sure that people who do come, who still feel like they need a little social distancing, which I understand, society is tough right now. It feels weird after quarantine, that we want to make sure there's enough space for everyone to enjoy. And movies, concerts, things that we can use the green for. We'll be exploring many of the shows that we do during the summer for families can be moved to the green pretty easily. Magic is the exception for that one. So we'll continue to evaluate the use of the amphitheater, and when it feels like that will be easier to use. And we will continue, as we talked about at the retreat, we'll continue our alternative engagement. And quite frankly, a lot of these will most likely continue from here on out. They were very popular with our visitors, but we wanted to make sure this year that we still had a very full schedule of alternative engagement. So Betsy has already gotten quite a few of these lined up, and we are going to look at possibly using some of our merchandise or things like that for small prizes this year, just to be able to have a little bit more engagement from people. Oh, that's displaying strange, I'm sorry. So before I move on, does anyone have questions or comments about events right now?
No, it's exciting though.
Yeah, so I didn't mention Jazz Festival because we are still planning that, but I'll give more updates at next month's meeting. I did want to mention the residential waste collection schedule change. I'm very excited. I can't say enough thank yous to volunteers, HOAs, rental companies, and rollback service providers for assistance with us being able to really blanket the town with the new stickers on the trash cans. So everyone watching at home, if we missed your trash can or your street, I truly apologize. We have plenty of stickers left. Please feel free to email me if you need assistance. We did our best to get one sticker on every can that was out at the road. Bridge clings have been provided to all the rental companies, and we've had quite a few picked up. And all of the other items you see on the slide, the ways that we are reaching out to people, have all been completed as best we can tell. Like I said, the can stickers, we may have missed a few cans, but I think it went pretty well. And Sandy is collecting data as you requested at the last council meeting, and on a monthly basis about how many trucks are coming for each pickup, and a tonnage report and things like that. So I don't have that to report on tonight, but she'll have the May information at the end of the month. So moving on to other things that we surveyed, since we surveyed trash. The mayor and the town manager last month asked if I would conduct a really quick survey regarding a suggested change to our ordinance concerning dogs on the beach. And the survey was open for approximately 2 weeks and received almost 900 responses, so I was pleasantly surprised by that. And those included residents, visitors, property owners, and business owners. And very short survey, quite unscientific, just really intended to take a pulse of the community, kind of one of those things where you ask a quick question and your first response is how you really feel. So I'm going to go over just a little bit of the information that I got. First, to educate the people watching, I did want to go over our current ordinance really quickly. So this ordinance concerns animals running at large is the section in our ordinance. And it mentions things about animals being on people's property and other items, but the section I really want to talk about is the animals on the beach. So this subsection 3, no animal shall be deemed running at large when the animal is on the public beaches of the town. The animal is under immediate control of the owner. For the purposes of this section, immediate control means the animal is within sight, sound of the owner, and responds to audible commands from the owner. I also wanted to add in there that another section includes the mandatory removal of feces. I apologize in advance. That's not the first time you're going to hear this word during my presentation tonight. Civil penalties can apply both for having an animal that is out of control and if you don't remove feces, too. So, just throwing out some quick charts and graphs. The first one on the left, you can imagine my surprise when I pulled these very first numbers of just the simple question, we're pitching a change to the ordinance that would require leashes Memorial Day to Labor Day from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Do you support it or not, ranking 1 to 5? So it was almost evenly split, which is not what I was expecting at all. Like I said, the survey was very short, only had a few questions, but luckily those questions could be looked at in different ways to get kind of to the heart of the matter. So I did want to mention before we get into a little bit more data, the groups that responded to the survey. And part-time and full-time residents by far were the largest respondents. We also had those that self-identified. These are all self-identified. Property owners, visitors, and the little blue section here, I couldn't fit the label in, but that's a business owner or employee. So this looks very messy, but I'll walk you through it. I could not make it fit on one slide. The thing I want to point out first is the largest bar right here is I don't want the ordinance to change. So when I asked if you are in support or not of, how do you feel quickly about the possibility of the ordinance changing to ask for leashes in the high season? The next question I asked was, if you don't support this, or if you have other thoughts about it, we want to hear that. And I did give some options there that people could choose from. And some people also wrote free-form comments. So I did go through manually, and the very free-form comments I put into categories. I will warn you, I removed a few comments that were just completely off topic here, so maybe 3 or 4. So this is not quite the full amount. But when people put in their numbers of support, but when they said what they wanted about the ordinance, it was quite telling. So overall, 428 of the respondents ultimately don't want the ordinance to change. A smaller amount are in favor of the suggested change, or moderately in favor. So if people put a 4 there, I said moderately, and then I also did neutral for 3. And then there's this whole smattering of other colors that I didn't bother to put labels on, because when people were given the chance to free-form answer, the answers were all over the place. Some wanted less ordinance, some wanted no dogs ever on the beach. There was a huge range of categories there. So not a great consensus there. The numbers that came out for me, obviously, were that at the heart it seemed that most people did not want the ordinance to change. So I did want to show you as well, because they are your constituents, is what people who identified as residents, either full-time or part-time, felt. And here, when you split that out, you can see, so again, this kind of aqua color right here is I do not want the ordinance to change, so continue allowing dogs under the control of their owner. And the darker blue is in favor of the suggested change. And then these little bars down here are, again, those sort of spread out ones. So I also asked, just a free form, anything else you'd like to add, and I apologize for the formatting on this slide, because I did want to pull out some of the comments for you, and I think you may have had this in your packet, in your council packet. There were lots and lots of completely free form comments from people, and we did that on purpose. And the comments from people who did not want the ordinance to change really centered around the idea that our current ordinance is unique to our town. It's important to why they live, visit, and play here. So you can see on the left some of the more common types of comments that we got. Some of the different leash versions, and the reason I call it leash versions is because that's all those 10 little bars of every permutation of having a dog on a leash. Were here. So People who were for the change we suggested, which is just the high season on a leash, only 10 to 6, felt that they were reasonable for the height of summer. But then we kind of got into people veering into not having dogs on the beach at all or having them leashed all the time. And the most common types of comments were, not all owners have control, unleashed dogs are danger, too much poop. I will admit that the feces comments were on both sides of the pros and cons. That is probably one of the most common comments, is that people saying that they wish people did a better job of picking up after their dogs. And then, like I said, we had these wide ranges where people wanted dogs leashed all the time, everywhere in town, or no dogs at all on the beach in season here. And someone did even comment that they preferred no dogs on the beach at all, which is, obviously outside of what we were asking, and really the spirit of the, excuse me, the spirit of what the ordinance change was considering. So to give you my unscientific opinion, very analysis, the opinions were obviously very split. If you just look at the basic data, it was split almost 50-50. I'm really glad we had those free-form comment sections, because it was really nice to hear from people how important it was to them. Full and part-time residents were quite vocal about their enjoyment of the current ordinance, which again allows dogs under the control of their owner unleashed. As I said, and you saw in the comments, many people live here or play here or visit here specifically because of that rule. I did notice from the comments too that better education regarding our ordinance might be helpful, a little bit why I went over it tonight, but also maybe something that we can look at over the summer as people are coming into town. And there were some comments about enforcement as well. I didn't call them out specifically because they were a bit all over the place, but again, for the people watching at home, and something that I probably need to do a better job of educating on, is that during the beach, when the lifeguards are on duty, anyone can contact a lifeguard, and lifeguards will, if they see that a dog is being a nuisance, they will ask the owner to leash the dog. And they can do that with law enforcement backup if necessary. Obviously, people can also contact law enforcement. Some of the complaints that I saw in the comments seem to be unsolved because they were never reported. So I did just want to bring that up. Before I go on, I don't know how much discussion you guys want to have about it, but that's my humble analysis of the data.
Commissioner, I think you did an excellent job in summarizing all the opinions. I think what we need to do with council right now is kind of just individually say, do we want to, change the ordinance, or in fact we want to keep it in place, so we can kind of just poll everybody's opinion and your thoughts one way or the other, and based upon how the council feels, then we can give direction to staff. So I don't know who would like to start, but or we can just go around the tables. But I think if we can give staff our opinion whether or not, based upon what we've heard here, should we go ahead and change, or should we just basically live with the existing ordinance and enforce it better? So who'd like to start?
I'll start. Thank you very much for the detailed survey. I love the way you rolled it out so quickly and kept it fairly simple. I'm really glad to see we got some good input, and kind of cool to see who was responding. My feeling is that this certainly isn't the first time we've heard about this issue, but it does point out that there is quite a bit of support for what we have going on, and some of it is because we are unique in that area. I personally don't have a dog. I'm a grandmother to dogs, but they're my grand dogs. But I mean, I know my own feeling is I would limit my taking the animals out in the heat of the day, and we do a lot with our company to try to educate people about, proper dog care in even around pool areas and all kinds of things. So, but I know how important people's pets are to them. My point would be to not change anything this year. A lot of it has to do with because people have made their plans and certainly are counting on what they've expected us to have in the past, but also to take a look at, more education and just trying to make sure people feel like they can issue a complaint if they find somebody's being unruly. That would be my point of view, and it's certainly something we can continue to monitor. But I would want to give a change of this nature a lot of lead time if we were ever to adjust the timing of when dogs are allowed on the beach, just because of the fact that people are expecting it this year, and if we give it a little more time to give a little more attention to education and enforcement, then maybe we'll see some improvements. So that's my point of view.
Thanks, Monica. Rob, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can't hurt anything to do some modification to the ordinance that we have. I think nobody's saying not, well, apparently some people said to ban dogs from the beach, which is just ridiculous, I think. But to ask people to put them on leashes, I don't think is a big inconvenience. I mean, you have a bunch of people on the beach and some dog comes over and pees all over their stuff, that's ruined their day, as opposed to somebody had to put the leash on their dog. I don't really find that ruining their day. So modification to it, I think, is what we need to do. If you think that it's too late for us to get it done this season, I really don't agree with that. I think we can do it any time that we want to, but we should, the sooner, obviously, the better.
Thank you, Rob. Sandy?
I just think that looking at the responses, most people think that our laws are pretty lenient. They like them. And I say just leave them how they are right now and see what happens during the summer again.
So leave it the way it is.
Leave it the way it is right now.
Nancy?
Yeah, my interpretation was that, regardless of the stakeholder group, people are overwhelmingly supportive of the way things are. I agree with Monica. I don't think that the time to change it would be now. And I think it's one of those situations where education would probably really help. And it's probably, a handful of people that are ruining it for everybody else. It's like, the cyclist that's riding against traffic or the person that's crossing not at a crosswalk. It's always somebody that just thinks the rules don't apply to them that's ruining it for everybody, and which is unfortunate. And so, we seem to do a great job with outreach or little videos or just posts or tidbits to try to help remind people of all of that. And, I think that would be better. The last thing, when you said about, 911, I'm imagining some insane person calling 911 because there's dog poop in the sand.
Right.
Like thinking, please don't be that person. But, there probably will be that person, which, that just makes my blood boil. But I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. I'll weigh in too. And of course, that was one of the big issues in incorporation was people were going to lose their rights of being able to take the dogs to the beach. And we're not only a people-friendly place, we're a dog-friendly location. And I'd say 9 out of 10 renters come here with their dogs. I mean, everybody comes with a dog, it seems, just from personal observation of all the rentals around us. And I think I kind of agree with everybody else that kind of leave it as is. Education and enforcement, probably we could do a better job on because there are those that cannot control their dogs no matter what they do, but they are the exceptions, not the rule. And kind of going back to what Monica says, if anybody's crazy enough to take their dogs to the beach when it's 80 or 85 degrees out there in hot sun and sand, it's crazy. But it sounds like there's a consensus at the council right now not to make any change and perhaps take a look at education and how to make a complaint or enforce it if it becomes a real issue.
Okay, thank you very much, council.
Thank you for
Thank
presenting
you for
all
the
that
work. I think it was
information.
excellent work.
Yeah, so I'll come back to you next month. I'll have a few discussions with Merrick and perhaps Chief Ackerman about what they see the most. And I was thinking, you know, a fun video
Yeah.
about dog poop, I need to say it again, would be good. So, okay, thank you very much. And that's all I have tonight.
Could I just add one thing? When you're talking with Merrick at the lifeguard, you know, and the lifeguards, it would be interesting to have them be kind of conscious of, you know, anecdotally, how many complaints and issues that they're kind of tracking. I mean, not to make it into some big report necessarily to add to their safety concerns that they've got to prioritize, but I do think it would be interesting to see what kind of, what they're observing and just, you know, with an eye toward not only the people, but the dogs on the beach, since they're kind of in a position to notice.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. I have made a note of that. Any other questions?
Nope, thank you for
Thank you for
everything you're doing,
everything,
trying to get us some events going. Last but not least.
Almost promise you I'm going to be the shortest of this presentation. I know that disappoints you because you like to hear me talk. Financial update. You have slides in front of you. You received via email the report that Teresa prepared. Similar to last month, the news financially is very good for us still. Starting with the cash that we have on hand, if I can get this to work. There we go. Right now, our cash on hand is about $882,000 more than this time last year. So as we go through the revenues versus expenditures, you'll see why. Approximately 3% of that, $288,000, is held in our checking account. The rest is in our investment accounts. Not that investment accounts are earning much money, but that's just a good practice to get into. Let's see if I get this to work. That just shows you the spread or the mix of our investments and where the money's being held. Talk about the revenue side. Budget versus actual. This is the same graph, it's just updated. This is through the end of April. We'll point out that our ad valorem tax collection rate as of the end of April was 99.87%. That's 0.02% more than we collected for the entire fiscal year last year. So right now we're owed just a little over $6,000 in ad valorem taxes. That's a really impressive rate of collection. So that's really good news. Sales tax, which includes collections up through January, because remember that we were running that lag in those collections. It's up $142,000 from the same period last year. Occupancy tax collections are $286,000 ahead of where we were last year. Land transfer taxes up $309,000 over where we were last year. We've collected more than we budgeted in land transfer tax for the entire year already. Again, the one revenue that's lagging last year is the utility franchise tax. We're about $25,000 short of where we were last year, and then also ABC revenues is down about $8,000. In total, revenues in the current year outpacing last year by $401,000. We've collected year over year. So we've collected a total of 76% of our revenue, our budgeted revenue so far this year versus 69% this time last year. So again, well ahead in the revenue side. On the expenditure side, still we're well within budget. Actually, we're right on track where we have been. Last year we had gotten through about 70% of our budgeted expenditures. This year we're at 69, so it's about the same. We were going to have to bring in some budget amendments in a future meeting just to clean up before the end of the fiscal year, just some of the different departments, just to be sure that everything comes out in balance. We'll say that through, let's it's the expenditure comparison year over year, just for your reference. And then this is just the summary, just showing where we are. So in total, through the end of April, revenue exceeds expenditures by just over $748,000. So we're revenue in excess of expenditures, $748,000. Last year, expenditures were in excess of revenue by $52,000 at this point last year. So we're having a really good year financially, primarily driven obviously on the revenue side of the budget. And you can see that in land transfer, sales tax, and occupancy tax. The budget that you developed and you adopted last year was very appropriate given where we were in the pandemic, very conservative. Just really pleased to be able to report that been able to outperform expectation. And if any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer.
And Drew, we got 2 months to go, and I know some of these lag a little bit, but you don't foresee any significant change between revenue and expenses going in through the end of the year?
I do not. Other than the revenue is obviously going to finish very strong this year. We've got a few more good months of sales tax collection, and then occupancy tax. We're obviously into some pretty strong months for that as well. Current projection is we should be able to end up the year at about $800,000 revenue in excess of expenditure. We'll be adding some money into fund balance this year.
Yeah.
And that's just a testimony of the way you all budgeted last year, and then great revenue and controlling the expenditures as well.
Terrific news. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Going to item number 9, the mayor's agenda. I just have a few things. The mayor, chairman, COVID meetings, we had one last week, and we're now going to move to monthly meetings or as required. As Christian was pointing out, the vaccinations now are running close to 50%. Actually, they're going to run no more clinics in the county, and basically going to be going over to the drugstores now, which I know Sunshine has actually started actively giving vaccinations over there. So we will meet as required, and hopefully not the next one's a hurricane. I did have a mayor's meeting last week. We reinitiated that. We used to meet monthly and with the chairman, and so now that basically hopefully COVID is a little bit in the rearview mirror, we met last week. I hosted the session. We had a lot of discussion about basically the labor shortage here on the beach, and I'm sure that people like Monica can really relate to that, but between the labor shortage and housing, the major issues for the county and the towns as we move forward. Also tried to probe on taxes a little bit. The county will not raise their taxes this year. We know Southern Shores, obviously, with beach nourishment, will be raising their taxes. I could not really get an indication one way or the other from the other 4 mayors, although I think most of them will possibly be staying flat, but who knows when they get into the budgeting cycle. So we'll continue to try and dig in that and certainly help us in future planning. I do have tomorrow, I did get appointed to the board of the League Local Leadership Foundation, and subsequently became president of the board. So we're having our first executive committee meeting tomorrow morning. The full board will meet in May, and definitely the Leadership Foundation, we're trying to get it reestablished for the league, but it's definitely challenged from the standpoint of revenues, not so much from the expenses. And so it's going to be an interesting challenge and an interesting year when it comes to the foundation. Along those same lines, and I'd like to congratulate Drew, who's gotten reelected to the North Carolina League of Municipalities Board of Directors for a 2-year term, one of the 3 managers, and so I'll have the pleasure of serving with Drew for the next year. And along those same lines, the executive director of the league, Paul Meyer, is going to be coming in over the next week or 2 for a visit, and certainly Drew and I will get an opportunity to talk with him, and hopefully we'll be able to get the mayors together to talk with him. But it's it's good when we get the executive director with 550 cities to be able to come out to Duck and spend some time with us. That's all I have. With that, we'll go on to council members' agenda, starting with our Mayor Pro Tem, Monica.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to mention that while I'm serving on the Visitors Bureau, and as we've seen reported, that one of the big pushes for the Visitors Bureau is the Soundside Event Center, and they're moving forward with the plans for the boardwalk, and that's going to be really modeled after, what they've seen Duck do, which is great. And they feel like, just reading, I think just reading that what the commissioners had to approve this contract that we've got for engineering, but they will be getting, much like what we did when we developed the park and everything, there is going to be some options for public input, the opportunity for public input. So it'll be kind of a nice tangible amenity that I think everybody in the county can really enjoy, and they want to make sure they can still access the water, because there are people that go off and kayak or kiteboard off of that area. But I think it's really going to be a nice feature for visitors and residents alike. So I wanted to mention that. I did just get the Visitors Bureau numbers for March, and I'll just share quickly. I just got the email this evening. Overall year-to-date numbers, year over year for, are way high. Meals are up 45%, and occupancy was up 263%. Again, that's, month over month, so you're looking at the pandemic months of March last year, which, were super low, much like everything else. But the first 3 months of Duck, for Duck particularly, are up 218% for occupancy tax, which of course is a big revenue generator. And I think it is sort of indicative of, just the strength of what we're seeing in those off-season months, again, compared to last year, but that's a big number. And comparatively, it was about just under 190% for the whole Northern Beaches towns. So we're ahead of the norm for that, and we kind of have a strength in that number. So I thought those were interesting enough to share with everybody tonight. And then finally, I'll just encourage everyone that's listening and that does attend the meetings to please, I want to encourage public comment, and it's great to get the input, much like we got from the survey tonight, but just hearing from people that are in the community that want to just say anything they want to the council, because I do believe that the council is listening as well as the staff, and I just want to make sure people feel encouraged to make public comment. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you, Monica. Rob?
No, I've got nothing, thanks.
Sandy?
I have nothing.
Nancy?
I want to say happy belated birthday to our town, because we're off a couple of days, but happy birthday, Duck. And I also want to say that I think Christian's report was particularly hopeful. That will be nice to have some special enhancements going into the later part of the summer. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I have the right day, because I always feel like I pass them when I'm walking to the firehouse on Fridays. Is that the trash? I just want to give a shout out to the crew that is out there every Friday morning picking up trash. That is a thankless job, but please know that there are people that are very thankful for it, and they are, diligent and committed, and their work gets noticed. So thank you, everybody out there that does that. I know Sandy does, because I see him, but.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yep.
Item number 11, did we get any additional public comments in, Christian? No. Is there any other business to come? Does our audience have any public comments? Is there any other business come before council? If not, I'll close item 11, other business. And at this point in time, I'm going to ask Mayor Pro Tem Monica if she'll read a motion to take us into closed session.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we enter into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318-11-5 to establish or instruct the public body, staff, or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the public body in negotiating the price and other material terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property for any public purpose located at 101 and 103 Scarborough Lane, owned by Larry Herron, Thomas Herron, Casey Herron, Sierra Herron, and property located at 1165 Duck Road, owned by Larry Herron, Thomas Herron, Deborah Herron, Vicky Herron, and Catherine Herron, by purchase, option, exchange, or lease.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, all in favor of going into closed session, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
We're now in closed session. Closed session, I'm going to ask our town attorney, Robert Hobbs, to give us a summary.
Thank you, Mayor. During the closed session, the council gave instructions to the town staff regarding the property that was discussed.
Thank you, sir. Let me remind council that our next scheduled meeting will be the mid-month meeting on Wednesday, May 19th, 2021 at 1 p.m. With that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved?
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are now adjourned.